Okay, I think we are good to go ahead and start. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today at the 2022 Ohio Nutrition Incentive Network Annual Convening. If there are any sessions you've missed but are interested in, you can still register for any of the sessions for a recording. We'll share a link to register in the chat box now, and you'll get a link to the recording next week. We are beginning each session with a land acknowledgement, which we have sourced from the Ohio State University Office of Diversity and Inclusion. A land acknowledgement recognizes and respects the relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their ancestral and contemporary territories. We acknowledge that the state of Ohio occupies the ancestral and contemporary territory of the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandot, Ojibwe, and Cherokee peoples. These lands were ceded in the 1975 Treaty of Greenville and the forced removal of tribes through the Indian Removal Act of 1830. We would also like to invite you to add your pronouns to your displayed Zoom name or share them in the chat box. And if you feel inclined, go ahead and turn on your cameras so that we feel like we're having a group discussion here. If this is your first session today, the Ohio Nutrition Incentive Network is a multi-sector coalition working toward a shared vision of affordable access to healthy local foods and a healthy, equitable, and resilient Ohio food system. We represent diverse regions of Ohio and collaborate to advance nutrition incentive programming statewide. We'll be sharing a full contact list early next week with recordings and notes from all sessions. Today, Ohio Nutrition Incentive Network members have a specific background and have included OHNIN in their profile names. Our network is looking to expand and diversify. If you are interested, please contact Anna Bird at Produce Perks Midwest. Her email is in the chat box. It's time now to begin the content of our session, and we have reserved time at the end for Q&A, but OHNIN members are monitoring the chat, so feel free to type in any questions you have, and we can answer them if possible. But they will also take note of any questions that are better fit to be answered live during the Q&A. And so just a brief introduction. Today in this session, we're going to be talking a lot about policy. And so policy impacts our food and how we access it in so many different ways and at each level of government from local to federal. These impacts can range from how much families receive in SNAP dollars, how much schools are reimbursed for school lunches, where grocery stores are encouraged to locate, to whether or not there's infrastructure to support local farms and food businesses. Our two panelists today will talk about both broad policy goals and specific policy impacts. Our first presenter today is Amy Baskes. She's the founder of Amy Baskes Consulting and has a wealth of experience with a multitude of organizations, from the Chefs Collaborative to Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture and the Organic Farming Research Foundation. She currently is with Amy Baskes Consulting and is also a member of the Ohio Nutrition Incentive Network. Katherine Ungar is also going to be speaking today. She is a senior policy associate with the Children's Defense Fund Ohio and works to advance policies and programs to improve child nutrition in the state with the goal of ending childhood hunger. So with that, I'm going to turn it on over to you, Amy, and you can start your presentation.
Super, thank you, Beth, and welcome to everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started in a presentation representing the Ohio Food Policy Network, giving you all an overview of our network's policy agenda, just to set the stage on kind of actions and activities happening at the state level relevant to, I'm guessing, your work as it relates to nutrition incentives and other areas of work that you may be engaged in. So to kind of anchor us, I think this quote from Wendell Berry is helpful when we think about food policies and food systems. How we eat determines to a considerable extent how the world is used. And this is a simple way of describing a relationship that is inexpressibly complex, really, really complex, and really hard to say. And you all work in food system work in various pieces and parts of it, and you're part of the Ohio Nutrition Incentive Network. So you, I think, all are aware of these food system diagrams that show that it's a complex system. It's a food web. The center part of that web are is the life cycle of food, from growing through processing, through eating and selling, and food waste, which then brings the issues that are in the blue-green ring, second out, issues like ones I'm sure you're engaged in: food security, environmental stewardship, community viability, jobs, and then all the people and actors who make this work happen. And all of these people have different experiences, different training, different kind of languages and protocols that they work in, different departments of government or kind of organizational professions, right? So it's a lot of pieces, a lot of moving pieces in food systems. And not surprisingly, then food system networks like the Ohio Food Policy Network or your local food policy council, or OHNIN, are complex. This is a picture, actual network map of the Ohio Food Policy Network, which is a snapshot of our network in March of 2017. The green dots include over 600 survey participants who were also then asked to name additional people that they work with regularly. I think it was up to 10 people. And you can see where there's density and where there's spaces, but how we're all connected is what this image was meant to represent. Again, another way at getting at that networks, inherently social networks, are complex. And so our network, the Ohio Food Policy Network, is a group of individual organizations, local and regional food policy councils, community volunteers, people who are there for their job, people who are there because it's their family farm or their livelihood, people who are involved because they, are community activists and care about these issues. And we work together to connect and collaborate on education and advocacy. It's an all volunteer network, but we share, and no matter how we're coming to the table, we share in a vision for a food system in Ohio that is sustainable, healthful, equitable, resilient, and accessible. And so this idea, right, of food policy, and I think there's a great quote from Michael Pollan, which is here, and kind of captures this idea of voting with your fork. The wonderful thing about food is that you get 3 votes a day, if you're lucky, right? Those of you working on hunger and access might question that assumption, but the wonderful thing is that every time that you vote with your fork, you have the potential to change the world. And this is an idea that's attributed to, or this is a quote, obviously, that's attributed to Pollan, but is much deeper than what he wrote about in Omnivore's Dilemma or any of his writings. That we simply, with our food choices, with our food dollars, we can change our food system. And in contrast to that, I like to think of a quote I attribute to Raj Patel. I've heard him say at a conference. Raj is the author of the book Stuffed and Starved and other food writing. But he said it's a distinctly American idea to think you can simply shop your way to a new food system. And I think this idea that as consumers, we have a lot of power, but really there are a lot of food policies in place, as Beth set us up in her intro, that shape our food system, from where funding goes to what organizations work on, to what zoning and codes allow for growers, and all kinds of different ways. And Dr. Jill Clark at Ohio State University, Glenn College, has said frequently and often, she's a member of our steering committee, there is no Department of Food, right? So in getting back to that complexity, food policy councils like the Ohio Food Policy Network or something that operates on a local level draws from various actors in government agencies, organizations, for-profit businesses, nonprofit organizations, to really reflect all the various policies that govern how food is grown, eaten, distributed, and waste is handled. So the Ohio Food Policy Network's timeline, just to give you a sense of how we work, and then we'll switch into what we're working on. We are, as I said, an all-volunteer network. In 2007, in the Strickland administration, there was an executive order signed that created a state-level food policy advisory council that operated for 5 years until Strickland was out of office and the next administration's policy priorities changed. And that was housed in the Department of Agriculture. But since 2012, OFPN has been operating as a grassroots network at the state level, drawing from local food councils and other state level actors. And mostly at that time, we began hosting an annual event. By 2017, we created a roadmap, which was based on engagement with over 600 Ohioans, many of whom we sourced through local food councils, but other organizations as well from all over the state, to kind of identify shared priorities and goals and areas of work that we all held in common, with the idea that we are stronger together, and that many of the work that we might be working on a very hyper local level, we, standing shoulder to shoulder, have more leverage, have a stronger voice at the state level and possible federal level, by kind of sharing in a set of priorities. And that was the roadmap. By 2020, early in the pandemic, we had created a policy platform, and I'm going to share that platform with you today to just give you a sense of the areas that OFPN supports and helps elevate. In the roadmap process, we identified 4 areas of work that we support. First being local farms, supporting the growth and production for farms in all areas of the state. Access and education, increasing access to locally grown food for healthy food for all Ohioans. Infrastructure, developing the aggregation, distribution, and processing networks that connect producers and utilizers within the system. And institutional utilization and participation in the food system. So that would be school food buying or hospital local food programs. And then specific policies that we are engaged in elevating on the local farms front, kind of recognizing that local farms are the bedrock of our local food system. We support policies that encourage the growth and production of farms in all areas of the state, especially those small and mid-sized farms that serve Ohio markets and embrace responsible, resilient production methods and fair labor practices. And so those specific policies that fall under those include incentivizing the transfer of farmland to next generation farmers with a focus on BIPOC, young and beginning farmers. Revising and clarifying the Ohio Building Code to provide clear guidance for the allowance of high tunnel and hoop house construction in certain jurisdictions, and incentivizing regenerative and sustainable farming practices that preserve and improve soil health. On the access and education front, OFPN advocates for policies that increase access for locally grown, healthy, and affordable food for all Ohioans, and affirms that food education is fundamental to addressing diet-related diseases. So for those of you in OHNIN and working on nutrition incentives, this is where we sort of declare our support for all the work that Produce Perks does and the work that you all are engaged in, supporting nutrition incentive programming in direct-to-consumer and retail settings throughout the state, expanding affordable SNAP online access to smaller retailers, local farms and markets, and home delivery, addressing SNAP EBT online and physical infrastructure shortcomings to ensure accessible online sales for all customers, ease of use, and the benefit of processing, and establishing a statewide nutrition and food system education pilot program and nutrition standards for pre-K through 12 education. On the infrastructure front, we support policies that develop the civic, social, physical, and economic and values-based infrastructure that's necessary for the aggregation, distribution, processing, and retailing of local and regional supply chain. So here we're looking to support all the groups that are looking for an interagency task force, including some of those Ohio agencies listed, to identify existing food infrastructure and development needs across different regions and the financing options that support the development of infrastructure to serve small and mid-sized operators, to create a robust financing tool to support the development of a local supply chain, and to support expansion of processing of livestock, aquaculture, and specialty crops across the state. So all of those built environment pieces and the people power that would make our safety net stronger. And finally, in our fourth area on institutions, OFPN supports food purchasing policies that reduce the barriers to institutions buying from local sources and allows them to help develop local and regional economies. So here we support policies specifically that change contracting and procurement rules across state government to allow more vendors to participate in local and regional food purchasing and increase the amount of reimbursement available to schools that purchase from local food. So that was a mouthful, and that was our policy platform. It was designed in an iterative process through a lot of stakeholders sharing the work that they are advancing in their specific organizations. So as a network, we're not at the State House advocating for these policies specifically as much as we're lifting up the work of others, including the work that you all are engaged in through OHNIN and Produce Perks and other peer groups. And so for more information about OFPN, when I stop sharing my slide, I'll put the link to our website in the chat, which is ohiofpn.org. But there are a bunch of resources about food policy councils and about food policy generally, food policy in the state on our resource page, which is listed here. We are an all volunteer organizations, but we have faithfully held an annual event, and we hold pretty regular webinars on various areas of our food policy agenda and other relevant issues to local food policy councils. So signing up on our website for those virtual convenings and webinars is possible through our website. And I just also wanted to put a plug in for an event that's happening this Sunday, which is instead of our annual summit, we are joining forces with Food Tank to host the national site of the World Food Day celebration, which will happen at WOSU Studios in Columbus and also be streamed live. And I'll put the link for that in the chat. We encourage you to register, come in person or stream it. You can join our listserv currently there are about over 500 folks on that listserv who share information about their work, looking for peers across the state and learning from others across the state as well. So that could be a place to put your own information out to a statewide audience. And if you specifically would like the Ohio Food Policy Network to sign on to actions that you're taking that fit within our framework, there is a page on our website which is shown at the bottom there. It's got a lengthy handle, but the policy action support process is a place where we would love to lift up your work, more specifically by getting it out on our listserv, maybe hosting a virtual convening about it, or literally signing on to your campaigns. So that's the end of my overview of OFPN. And I'll put a couple of those links in the chat and turn it over to Katherine. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you all see this? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so switching gears a little bit, but I think very much in line with what Amy just shared. I am Katherine Ungar. I work for the Children's Defense Fund of Ohio, and I just wanted to provide an overview of a report that we put out in April, where we did focus groups and interviews with SNAP participants themselves, recognizing barriers and understanding just really how the interaction with SNAP and accessing healthy foods has been, and trying to learn and glean from some of those insights into certain policy changes. So I'm just going to really talk about the background of why this came about, sort of our project, and then the results that we learned from the folks themselves, and then some of the next steps. So there's a lot on the slide, but really what this project came about was, first of all, as the Children's Defense Fund, SNAP is a really important program. It's the #1 nutrition program for children in the country. And so it's imperative that when we look at policy change that affects SNAP, we know it's impacting children. So this is a project that we really thought was important, and we wanted to get involved, especially because it was elevating voice of those who are experiencing the proposed policy changes. So at the federal level, there's been a lot of rumblings. There was the National Hunger Commission. You'll see on the next slide various reports that have been put out, really kind of looking at ways that they can incentivize healthy eating through the SNAP program. And I do want to take a moment here to say, you know, there is no difference between whether you're on SNAP or not on the food choices that people make. There's no distinction on like some group not eating as healthy as another group. Absolutely none. So that in itself is a little bit of a misnomer, but regardless, some of the things that they came out with from this National Hunger Commission recommendation to the federal government was using financial incentives to encourage SNAP participants, incentivizing the purchase through cost sharing opportunities with states, employing evidence-based product placement strategies, not permitting sugar sweetened beverages to be purchased with SNAP, and reforming sort of SNAP Ed to be state of the art. So those were some of the federal recommendations. And then there was also this strengthening the public health impacts of SNAP. And there they found, you know, food production, looking at policies and opportunities in the food production and distribution, looking at benefit allocations, such as increasing the amount and optimizing sort of the frequency in which SNAP benefits are issued. And then also looking at issues of eligibility and enrollment. So increasing enrollment. And there was another study finding that 88% of SNAP participants reported facing some type of hurdle to achieving a healthy diet, and affordability was the #1 by far and away. But also important to note, 30% of SNAP participants in this study reported lack of time to prepare meals from scratch, and 20% reported lack of transportation. So just what Amy was saying, it's sort of like all of the systems together. So just our project, our summary and goals. So our goal was to engage racially, economically, and geographically diverse perspectives from SNAP recipients across the state to capture their feelings and perceptions about the potential impact of some of the things that have been proposed at the federal government, and to see if there are any other new ideas on what might support them, you know, meeting their nutritional needs. And we also wanted to center the voices of SNAP recipients and to work with stakeholders to build consensus and support around a healthy SNAP policy priorities that could be pilot tested here in Ohio, and then to develop a final report summarizing some of those findings. We did end up meeting with over 86 SNAP participants themselves. And we obviously could not do that many individual interviews and focus groups ourselves. So we did have amazing partnerships with the following community-based organizations: Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition, Ethiopian Tewahedo Social Services, Gladden Community House, Us Together, Appalachian Children Coalition. They helped us in conducting the focus groups and interviews and creating the questions. All interviews lasted for about 1 hour. And to be eligible to participate, you had to be either currently participating in SNAP, have participated in SNAP at some point in 2020, or be eligible for SNAP. And each SNAP participant who participated was provided $50 for their time and expertise. Participants were asked broad, open-ended questions about their interactions with SNAP in Ohio, and then there's certain shopping behaviors and strategies that they thought would support healthy eating, followed by prompts about some of the specific strategies that you just heard have been proposed sort of in federal conversations, especially as we think about the Farm Bill and the Child Nutrition Program. Our national office works on some of those priorities. So some of these were federal, some of these are state, but we definitely wanted to capture everyone's thoughts. I do want to acknowledge this is qualitative research. It is, again, from these 86 participants, and then a statewide convening that we held with anti-hunger and advocacy organizations in the state and experts. So it's informed by community members who experience the role that SNAP benefits play in meeting or failing to meet their nutritional needs. And, we believe, Children's Defense Fund believes that these individuals possess critical element that no policymaker can simulate, which is firsthand knowledge and lived experience navigating SNAP. So here's a demographic breakdown of our SNAP participants that we included. You can see most of them were currently enrolled in SNAP. 81% of them did have children under the age of 18. The racial breakdown, we have 44% identified as Black, 38% as white, 6% as Latinx, 4% as Asian Pacific Islander. And then for gender, we had 73% identify as female, 26% as male, and 1% as pangender. Here's the different various age range of those participating, really spanned from 18 to 84. And then in addition to interviewing SNAP participants themselves, we wanted to hold a stakeholder convening of those who work in anti-hunger and public health and in community hospitals and touch sort of these different systems. So these were identified through a variety of channels, the Creating Healthy Communities, college and university researchers. And the goals of these convenings were to engage and listen to a broad group of stakeholders with varying backgrounds in a conversation around some of the proposed policy measures. So here are just some of the results, and I'll break it down a little bit more. This is from the SNAP participants. So when we asked around increasing SNAP benefit amounts, and this could come out sort of in their own conversation, many would say, like, when I'm looking at whole bread versus, and I think there's a quote about this, white bread, like the difference in cost alone is a huge barrier. We found that in talking with the SNAP participants in our for this report, that affordability was a barrier, which was in line with some of the federal government research. So you can see when asked around increasing SNAP benefits, there was really strong support, which may not surprise you, but it's still really important to mention here as it relates to supporting healthy eating. And then expanding in existing incentive programs like Produce Perks, of course, again, widely supported. Many of our participants did not know where they could go to utilize a program like Produce Perks, or they didn't know that they were eligible for it, or that it was not available at a retail location near them. Or they didn't know where the farmer's market was. So there were some barriers to accessing, but when asked around expanding, there was huge support. When we talked about expanding incentive programs to include other healthy items, not just fruits and vegetables, so like whole grains or canned vegetables, frozen fruits, this also had wide support amongst participants. Some of the ones that had a little bit less or some mixed support, I can see in the orange and the yellow. The orange is a low support, but I will just kind of skip down because I'll talk about these a little bit more. But for example, the tax on sweetened sugary beverages, which has been a policy that a lot of lawmakers have talked about at the federal level, this really was not supported by the people that we talked to. They felt like they shouldn't be prohibited from buying something that other people could. They also felt like they weren't, necessarily accessing it, but if they wanted to every once in a while, that should be available to them. So again, this had pretty low support, which was, we weren't sure either way how it would go, but it is important, I think, when we think about our own advocacy, that's probably not a policy that we'll be pushing for. But anyways, it was good to hear. And then I think this one is really interesting, the ability to purchase hot food items with SNAP. If you remember from that federal government, the idea of time and convenience and, the ability to buy like a hot chicken or, take that for your family, that's not available right now through SNAP. And many people feel as though it should be. And that was pretty widely supported amongst those that we asked. So overall, there was strong support for including hot meals. I'll just break it down a little bit. So again, the strategy with high level support, so expansion of produce perks to more retailers and more counties. Again, that expansion includes allowing SNAP incentives to be redeemed at more types of retailers and in more counties in Ohio, and also that pilots that could expand the allowable incentives, so whole grains or eggs. And like I said, that several SNAP participants expressed that they didn't know it, existed or how to use various programs. I won't go through every quote, but I think that my presentation will be shared, but you can see, some individuals who were asked around this. I didn't know you could use SNAP incentives at some farmers markets. That would be wonderful. It would be nice to know farmers markets that are local that you could go and use SNAP and get double dollars for fruit and vegetables. And then stakeholders said incentive programs are great, but they need to encapsulate frozen and canned options. In some areas, access to fresh fruits and vegetables is more limited. There was also discussion around access to a refrigerator. So there's a lot of things that you have to think about. So another strategy was the permanently increasing the monthly benefit amount, which I already discussed. Here's some individuals said, I know we get the maximum amount because of COVID, and that's been enough for us. I have been making sure that our choices are healthy and then we get a lot of fruits and vegetables. Before COVID, I didn't have enough SNAP money to get all of the groceries I needed to feed my family. I'm worried for when the extra amount stops and what that means for feeding my kids. And I should say, we did this at a unique time in which families were receiving their emergency allotments. And so now as we're starting to experience the COVID hunger cliff, this will be coming to fruition as people see their SNAP dollars cut significantly from what it was, with the emergency allotments, although we still have those. So, and then they allow hot prepared food items. You can see we would like to be able to buy hot prepared items. We don't see a difference between hot prepared foods and non-hot foods. If we need food now and we can't cover it with food stamps, sometimes we need these things. And then another one that I didn't talk about, and it didn't come up within our SNAP, our focus groups, but it did come up within the stakeholder convening, was around streamlining SNAP enrollment with other benefits like Medicaid and WIC, and how we can do that more seamlessly in our state. There's a lot of issues with cross enrollment and our streamlining of enrollment in multiple benefits programs. So that was a strategy that seemed to have wide support amongst stakeholders and is something we could consider here in Ohio. And then product placement restrictions in grocery and convenience stores had some mixed levels of support, as program linking incentives to disincentives, and the sugar sweetened beverage tax had low levels of support. And then here are some other ideas that came up. There might not have been enough discussion for us to include them in the high or low based on our coding that we had to do to make it meaningful. But these did come up maybe more than once. And so we felt like they were important to include in some other strategies. So waiving delivery fees for online SNAP, raise the gross income eligibility threshold for SNAP from 130% to 185%, and then expanded nutrition and health education. And then in-store promotions for healthy food options and addressing accessible transportation to some of these places where you can use produce perks or you can shop for groceries. So some of the next steps, we're going to continue to have these sort of discussions and collaboration amongst stakeholders and SNAP participants. Our grant funder is going to communicate the results at the federal level and including with our national office, who's very involved in child nutrition reauthorization, so that we can communicate some of these findings and then working towards implementing some of these strategies. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy and Catherine. And we can go ahead and open it up for questions at this time. If you would, if you want to raise your little virtual hand, we can certainly call on you. Or if you'd rather just go ahead and type your question into the chat box, that is welcome as well.
I have a question. Wonderful presentations. It was so much information to take in after a long day of Zoom meetings. I was wondering if you could both kind of mention or highlight one takeaway that we should take away from this session today. Or a few, if you want.
I think from my perspective, I think when we think about policy change, it's important to involve those who it will actually impact, and make sure that we don't do something that actually, we may have the best of intentions, but it might not be a helpful policy change. So just really trying to engage those that will be directly impacted.
And I guess my message to everyone is, if you think about some of the policy change that might address some of the things that were raised in Katherine's study, for example, it involves kind of multiple agencies or impacts multiple constituencies, to think of all of the friends and partners you can bring to advocate for that policy change, beyond your specific lane of whatever your very direct programming might be, but look broadly at kind of building that coalition. And food policy councils at the local level, at the state level, state agencies, state organizations that can be your friends, just to make kind of a louder voice behind your message, helps to bring to bear, I think, greater leverage. So then in our network, we're covering a lot of territory that, there are singular organizations working on a small part of one piece of our policy agenda. And hopefully it's a broad tent for many types of groups to live with under. So, leveraging those networks to make your biggest, loudest voice for some of these calls for change, I think is the takeaway that I'd send you with.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just add something, this isn't another takeaway, but, just through this work, and I also work in WIC, I think policy change, it doesn't always have to be legislative. Like, it can be as easy as communicating with an agency that might have direct contact with people who would impact. So like, just as an example, I know that there was a farmer's market in a certain community that they had the produce perks, and they engaged the WIC agency, who was then able to send out a text message. And we talked to some WIC participants who said that text message alone, like, I got me there, that I wouldn't have known about it but for. So I just say that to say, you know, thinking about policy change, or, you know, getting information out there in sort of like alternative than just legislative change.
Yeah, that's a great point, Catherine. The big P policy change versus the small P policy change, you know, getting agencies that are directly involved with this work maybe to think differently about how they go about it, how they reach out to folks, and how they partner with people is really important too. It definitely makes a big difference, and how widespread the information gets out to the people who need it and can use it. Anybody else have any questions for us today? Well, if we don't have any more questions, we just really want to thank you for joining us today. And if this is your last session of the day, we hope that you found the day informative and inspiring. We hope that you'll join us potentially for our happy hour discussion after the fact. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Amy and Catherine, for your time today and sharing your work with all of us so that we can take it forward and move policies forward in Ohio. Thanks, everyone.